Elena Rossi was not the kind of girl shadows followed. She was laughter, sunshine, late-night novels, and milk coffee-stained fingers. She was the girl who believed love belonged in poetry and soft confessions, not in deals, guns, and mafia dynasties. But life, dramatic and unmerciful, never asked what kind of girl you were before rewriting your destiny. And that rewrite began at 8:47 p.m. on a chaotic Thursday night when the city was shining but restless, when ordinary people were ending office shifts, when Elena was rushing out of her evening literature class with her tote bag slipping off her shoulder, unaware that fate had already chosen her to star in a story more dangerous than any she had ever read. It started with a harmless moment, a poster falling off the college notice board, twisting in the wind, hitting her shoe, the bold letters written across it, Moretti Charity Gala, invitation only. And though the paper meant nothing to her, it meant everything to the empire whose name it carried, because in Damien Moretti's world, every coincidence had a consequence, even accidental ones, especially accidental ones. And consequence arrived in the form of a sleek black convoy parked right outside her campus gate, engines humming like restrained beasts, men in black suits stepping out with quiet discipline, forming two sharp lines, and between them emerged the Mafia Heir himself, the uncrowned prince of Italy's most powerful family, the man newspapers never witnessed long enough to photograph clearly, the man rivals feared and allies adored in silence, Damien Moretti. But Damien didn't emerge to greet the world, he emerged for her. Elena didn't understand it at first, why 6 guards were suddenly blocking the pavement so she couldn't walk past, why every conversation in the street had died down, why the man himself was walking toward a random literature student like the universe had announced her name through loudspeakers only mafia families could hear. And when his cold, green-gray eyes met her confused brown ones, the world paused, like someone pressed the cinematic, dramatic reveal button on a remote she didn't own. And then his voice, calm but impossible to question, finally delivered her opening sentence. "You're late." Elena blinked. Late? Late for what? No agreement, no meeting, no conversation ever placed her near the Moretti family orbit. She had never agreed to anything, never even seen him before, and yet the quiet power of his tone suggested the world had already assumed her compliance, like destiny had overlooked her permission signature on the cosmic contract. "I don't know you," she whispered, stepping back involuntarily, but not far because she couldn't. The guards were walls made of flesh and loyalty, unmoving and silent. Damien reached down, picking up the fallen Moretti Charity Gala poster, the one she accidentally stepped on seconds ago, flipping it between his fingers like he already knew the invisible link connecting her to it. And then, "You will." But this story wasn't just a chance meeting. It was a deal disguised as salvation, because Damien Moretti needed a fake fiancé, someone clean, innocent, with no traceable link to rival families, someone believable enough to fool an empire that spied on emotions like professions, and though Elena never agreed to the role agreed to her. He leaned closer, calm and dangerously elegant, voice low enough to feel rather than hear. "If you walk away, my family will choose someone else for the deal, and the deal comes with death." Elena froze. She didn't need more explanation. In mafia worlds, death was punctuation, not consequence. The next words sealed her involvement. "Pretend to be mine at the gala. After that, you walk away, untouched." She should have said no. Anyone would, but fate never wrote stories for easy decisions. So she nodded, breath uneven, heart loud, whispering her own surrender unknowingly. "Okay." And he smiled for the first time. Not romantic, triumphant. The deal began gently, deceptively gentle, like dangerous stories always do. Elena was introduced to the Moretti estate not as a prisoner, not as a real future wife, but as someone whose very presence had to look chosen while remaining strategically accidental, a paradox she didn't understand but had to perform convincingly. She was groomed into the role by stylists who carried soft voices and sharper instincts, by staff who served fear on silver trays disguised as respect. and every mirror reflection of the elegant dresses they placed her in felt foreign to the girl who once thought coffee-stained sneakers were acceptable fashion language. While in the other wing of the mansion, Damien was being trained into leadership, strategy, intimidation, and emotional invisibility, lessons designed to teach a man how not to fall, not for anyone, not even someone his family appointed for deception. But love isn't born when hearts agree. Love is born when hearts didn't stand a chance. The first event she had to attend as his fiancé was a family dinner, a silent test she passed unknowingly because Moretti elders didn't judge what you said, they judged what your silence failed to conceal. She sat at a long dining table draped in black velvet, her bravery shaky but present. Damien on the other side, unreadable, composed, dangerously calm, not looking at her until she nervously reached for the salt shaker, her hand brushing accidentally against his wrist, one half-second touch that sent the Moretti matriarch's eyes narrowing like vultures evaluating emotion. Damien didn't react, he didn't pull away, he didn't look offended, he didn't look intrigued either, but his body betrayed a micro-pause, something only trained Mafia observers could decode. Elena didn't notice, she was too busy pretending to breathe normally, but every elder in the room noticed. In that world, even stillness spoke, and that stillness said everything. She was useful for the deal, believable for deception, she looked innocent enough to fool the public, nervous enough to look human, brave enough to stand near Moretti without collapsing, and most importantly, unpredictable enough that Damien Moretti didn't see it coming, which meant enemies wouldn't either. Except Damien did start seeing something coming. It came quietly, like guilt, like curiosity, like irritation at his own thoughts that wouldn't stop mentioning Elena Rossi internally. The next morning, she crossed paths with him in the corridor, dressed casually again, first time without stylists, holding a book titled Pride in Politics and Renaissance Literature. And he finally looked directly at her, eyes scanning the cover, not her face, and for a second, Elena believed this might be the only line their story would ever share. But then he asked the most un-Mafia question ever. You actually read that stuff for fun? Elena blinked again. A conversation, a real one, with him. She nodded cautiously. Yes? Damien didn't smile, but his head tilted like a man mildly amused by an unexpected variable. A tiny fracture in his emotional armor, barely noticeable, but for Elena, it felt seismic. Then Adrian ran past them both, shouting, "Sister, the horses are awake!" And the air exhaled the smallest sigh. The sigh was not annoyance, it was surrender. The deal was meant to last one night, but fate doesn't respect expiry dates on contracts she never signed. As the gala approached, Moretti enemies began stirring rumors, attempting to intercept information, testing whether the new fiancé was real or strategic, and Elena continued her role perfectly because she was motivated by the only thing that mattered, survival and Adrian's secured future. Yet while she mastered the character of the fake fiancé in public, Damien was failing spectacularly at mastering his own internal silence. Thoughts about her began creeping in at inconvenient moments, during gun strategy meetings, during silent empire negotiations, during late-night balcony reflections where the city lights shimmered, but his brain refused to shut off the question Elena whispered unknowingly into existence. If the deal ends, where will she go? And why does the thought bother me? But part one wasn't the love confession chapter. It was the spark chapter, the question chapter, the she was not meant to matter, but now she does chapter. Because in Mafia worlds, protection isn't romantic at first. Protection means instability in the heart. And for Damien Moretti, Elena had become the first unstable thing he couldn't control, couldn't contain, and couldn't silence. She thought she had agreed to one night. He feared she would walk away after one night. But the seed was planted. The story had begun. And an heir who mastered empires had just discovered the only territory harder than power. A heart that unexpectedly learns a girl's name like a treaty it never planned to sign. Elena didn't remember walking to the car. She only remembered the cold night air brushing her skin and the way Adrian's hand wrapped around her wrist, steady but firm, guiding her toward the black Mercedes parked at the curb. The city noises felt far away, drowned beneath the heavy thunderstorm building inside her own chest. As the door closed behind her, she found herself surrounded by leather, silence, and him, the Mafia Heir who had just claimed her as his fake fiancé in front of an entire world she did not belong to. She sat stiffly in the back seat while Adrian settled beside her, his presence too large, too warm, too consuming. The car began to move, and with every passing streetlight, Elena felt the weight of a decision she never actually made pressing against her ribs. She finally whispered, "Why me?" Adrian watched her for several seconds, silent, calculating, as if trying to decide how much truth she could handle. His reply was low, almost gentle. "Because tonight, in that ballroom, you were the only person who looked at me like a human, and not a threat." Elena blinked, unsure what that was supposed to mean. He continued, "And because my enemies already saw us together, if I pull back now, they'll smell blood." Her breath caught. "So this wasn't just for show?" Adrian gave a faint, humorless smile. "Nothing in my world is ever just for show." When the car finally stopped, Elena assumed they were somewhere she could escape from, but her heart dropped the moment she looked out the window. A massive estate spread across the hill, dark stone walls, iron gates, warm lights glowing like secrets hidden behind fortress walls. "This is your home?" she whispered. Adrian nodded. "You'll be staying here until things settle." She stared at him in disbelief. No, absolutely not. I am not moving into your house." Adrian leaned closer, voice steady like he was delivering a fact, not a request. "Elena, you're already involved. The moment you walked into that ballroom, the moment I pulled you toward me, the moment I said you were mine, people were watching. Dangerous people." She swallowed hard. "But I didn't agree to any of this." Something flickered across his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or reluctance. "You're right, but now agreeing is the only way to keep you alive." The words fell like a stone between them. He wasn't threatening her. He was stating a terrifying truth. Inside the mansion, Elena felt small against the towering ceilings and spiral staircases. Adrian walked beside her, his long strides steady, while she tried to understand how her quiet life had turned into this hurricane. She reached the grand hallway when a woman with sharp eyes and a professional posture approached them. "Sir, everyone is waiting in the strategy room," she informed Adrian. Then her gaze slid to Elena, assessing, reading, judging. "Is this her?" Adrian gave a single nod. "Yes, this is Elena, my fiancé." Elena's jaw tightened. That word felt foreign, heavy, stolen. Adrian must have noticed her discomfort because he gently placed a hand on her lower back, just a touch, warm and grounding, almost apologetic. "I'll explain everything," he murmured. But Elena wasn't sure explanations would fix anything. He guided her into a private office, closing the door behind them. The moment they were alone, Elena's emotions erupted. "You can't just drag me into your world, Adrian. You can't just decide I'm your fiancé and expect me to play along." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dominate the space with anger. Instead, he walked to his desk, leaned against it, crossed his arms, and looked at her with unbearable calm. He said softly, "Then tell me, what was I supposed to do? Leave you standing alone in front of Victor's men? Let them think you're someone who can be used to get to me?" Elena froze. "Who's Victor?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Someone who wants my position. Someone who plays dirty. Someone who doesn't mind bloodshed. Not even yours." The room suddenly felt colder. He took a step closer, voice deep and controlled. "Elena, if I hadn't brought you here tonight, you wouldn't have made it home." She wrapped her arms around herself, overwhelmed. "You're saying I'm in danger because of you?" Adrian shook his head. "No, you're in danger because you were standing near me. That alone was enough."
His honesty was terrifying. He took another step toward her, slow, deliberate, as if trying not to scare her more. "Elena, I swear to you, I will not hurt you, and I will not let anyone else hurt you either." She looked up at him, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "Why protect me? You don't even know me." His answer came without hesitation. "Because once I involve someone innocent, it becomes my responsibility." Something in his tone made her breath unsteady. A man feared by an entire city was standing inches away from her, asking for trust, with eyes that looked too sincere. "Okay," she whispered finally. "Fine, I'll stay, but only until this danger passes." Adrian nodded, relief flashing subtly across his expression. "Good, that's all I'm asking." But then he stepped even closer, too close, and Elena's pulse raced. "There's something else you need to know," he said, voice low. "The engagement isn't just for enemies." Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" Adrian exhaled slowly. "My father, my family, they believe it too. In this world, once a claim is made, you can't take it back easily." She stared at him in disbelief. "So your entire family thinks we're together?" "Yes, and tomorrow morning, they'll want to meet you." Her knees almost gave out. Adrian saw the panic forming and instinctively reached out, steadying her arm. "I'll be there," he promised quietly, "every second." His touch was gentle, warm, nothing like the dangerous persona everyone feared. For a moment, Elena forgot the mafia, the danger, the lies. She only felt the sincerity in his voice. But reality returned like a cold wind. "Adrian, what exactly do they expect from me?" His eyes softened. "For now, just to stand beside me." He hesitated, his voice dropping even lower. "Later, we'll figure out how to end this story safely." Elena didn't know whether he meant safety from his enemies or safety from the growing tension neither of them had asked for. That night, after being shown to a spacious guest room that felt more like a luxury suite, Elena stood by the window, staring at the city lights beyond the estate. Everything inside her felt tangled, fear, confusion, and something she didn't want to name. She touched her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. Fake fiancé. Fake. But why did it feel like her heartbeat didn't believe the word? Meanwhile, in his office downstairs, Adrian stared at a photograph. His father, his brother, and himself from years ago. He closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to fight memories he wished he could erase. "What have I dragged her into?" he breathed. For the first time in years, he felt responsible for someone who wasn't part of his world, and terrified that his world would destroy her. And upstairs, Elena felt the same fear, paired with a warmth she couldn't explain. Tomorrow she would meet his family. Tomorrow the lie with Grail. Tomorrow her life would no longer be her own.
Elena barely slept that night. Sleep in a world of anxious thoughts is never rest. It is merely closing your eyes while your mind continues pacing the room like a restless bard. And Elena's mind did exactly that, replaying every sound, every stolen glance, every quiet confidence in Adrian's voice, because fear is loud, but uncertainty is louder. And her heart kept asking questions her brain wasn't ready to answer. Questions like, why had Adrian chosen her? Why did his protection feel genuine? And why did the idea of being near him feel equally comforting and terrifying? Morning arrived softly, the same deceptive softness that all dangerous stories use to trick innocent souls, sunlight brushing through the curtains like a false promise, birds singing in the gardens, as if birds participated in Mafia aesthetics now, unaware that the mansion they overlooked was a world ruled by unspoken hierarchies rather than melody. And when a maid tapped gently at her door to inform her that breakfast was ready in the family lounge, Elena felt the dread coil in her stomach once again, because breakfast was not food here. Breakfast was introduction, assessment, and judgment
by Moretti elders who had built empires on instinct sharper than any legal system. And to survive these next hours, she would have to look like someone worthy of being Adrian Moretti's fiancé, even though she never truly agreed to the role. The role had agreed to her on her behalf and delivered her into its narrative arms fully unprepared. She entered the lounge wearing a soft cream sweater and jeans, hair loose, posture cautious but composed, trying to project ordinary confidence in extraordinary territory. Adrian was already there, sitting at the head of the table in a black, perfectly pressed shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to be stylish, not enough to be sentimental, not enough to look like rolled sleeves meant vulnerability, because vulnerability is a language Mafia Heirs are not taught, and while his expression was unreadable to anyone else, Elena, now familiar with his silences more than his words, detected the smallest crack of amusement in his gaze when his eyes flicked up, brief but loaded, like a spark thrown carelessly into a quiet night. And then he said casually, almost gently, "You look like someone who still thinks she can escape." Pouring tea like pouring tea was a strategy and not hospitality, and Elena exhaled sharply, sliding into the seat beside him, whispering under her breath, "Maybe I can," knowing fully well she couldn't actually test that hypothesis, not in his world, and especially not under the eyes gathering around them seconds later as the doors opened once again and Moretti family members entered. First was his father, Matteo Moretti, a tall, stern man with silver threaded through his black hair like trophies claimed without documentation, suit darker than the night Elena barely survived yesterday, gaze steady enough to freeze heartbeats mid-trajectory. Then came his younger sister, Livia. Red lipstick sharp but elegant, eyes suspicious in the way young women are suspicious of other young women when the other young women suddenly appear wearing an engagement story nobody agreed to share out loud. And then entered his uncle Raphael, slow, ominous steps, calculating demeanor carrying the cold precision Moretti elders are bred into through loyalty and strategic survival alone. And Elena felt her heartbeat accelerate once again because now the lies she never agreed to live in public had to breathe in public too, because lies in mafia worlds are not spoken. Lies are portrayed convincingly enough that enemies assume truth and allies assume loyalty. The kind of convincing that requires obedience, silence, and the art of acting small but fearless beside a giant, an heir, a man whose name alone carried territory, danger, and command. Matteo sat across from her, Raphael to the other side, while Livia remained standing behind her brother like silent surveillance was a sibling trait passed genetically. And then came questions, not dramatic ones, but still lethal in intention assessment. Where was she from? Who raised her? What did she study? Did she have enemies? Did she know how to survive silence? Did her hands tremble, or did the heart behind them tremble? Could a civilian girl hold allegiance near a Moretti heir without becoming leverage? Could Adrian Moretti protect someone without putting her into greater danger? And if danger came, could she endure long enough to be worth protecting? Elena answered each question carefully, Adrian correcting her replies silently through microglances when she spoke too quickly. And for a moment, Elena believed the lie was convincing enough that it began blending into role without protest, until the uncle finally asked the most dangerous question of all, delivered not in aggression, but in velvet-gloved dominance wrapped in surveillance silence. "Do you love my nephew?" Elena froze because the silence after that question was not silence. It was a battlefield where every heart presents its answer too early or too cautiously. It was the question that could unravel a deal she never willingly signed but had to carry convincingly now. And before she could choose how to reply, Adrian leaned forward, eyes narrowing with quiet command, voice firm but controlled. "She doesn't have to answer that yet." Elena blinked, because the word yet felt oddly intimate. She didn't want love. It was not part of the deal. But the heirs of mafia empires aren't supposed to say yet when love is never expected to bloom.
The lounge fell quiet. The staff paused mid-movement. Guards tightened posture outside. Adrian's father studied him sharply,
the uncle's eyebrow lifting like he detected an anomaly different than loyalty alone. Elena exhaling slowly, because the battlefield had momentarily ceased fire only because Adrian Moretti placed a hand in its path. And though nobody else could see it, the spark had already begun to burn micro-confidently, quietly, dangerously, between the two of them. A spark that Elena did not want to ignite, because sparks turn into fire, and fire turns into leverage, and leverage turns into death in mafia languages steeped in blood rather than poetry. And yet she could not deny that his intervention, his calm voice, his subtle control without cruelty, was beginning to blur lines inside her heart she had never even attempted sketching before entering the mansion. Later, Livia cornered her in the gardens with quiet, suspicious eyes and sharp, casual interrogation, asking questions too feminine to carry direct threat, but dangerous enough to assess weaknesses. "Do you know what you've signed up for? You realize who my brother is." Elena swallowed hard. "I didn't sign up for anything," she answered truthfully, for the first time because truth only matters when no enemy witnesses it. "I only agreed to stay alive." Livia's gaze narrowed further, then stay alive wisely. Then Raphael approached, speaking to his niece first, dismissing her like politics dismiss civilians mid-meeting, and addressing Elena instead with cold, calculating warmth, the kind that doesn't comfort but analyzes, saying simply, "The city has ears, and ears aren't always friends," gesturing subtly to the car parked near the gardens, engines humming softly like strategic beasts, too restrained to announce threats out loud. "You'll accompany Adrian to the city council meeting tomorrow. We test their reach, not yours, theirs." Elena's breath caught again. City council, politics, public appearances? The deal was growing. At sunset, she found Adrian sitting alone by the balconies overlooking a restless city, suit jacket placed beside him, posture firm but quiet in the way heirs learn to process emotional pressure without revealing emotions. Elena settling beside him silently because she had finally learned silence was safer than protest too loud, holding her own literature book, not knowing how to begin a conversation. So conversations began in silences instead, once again, until Adrian said softly, not watching her directly, eyes scanning the city lights instead, "If I didn't pick you yesterday, they would have picked someone else tomorrow, someone who wouldn't survive this game." Elena closed her book slowly, letting the silence hold her own thoughts momentarily before answering. "I don't know your game, Adrian. I don't know your rivals. I don't know your rules. I don't know what tomorrow will test. But I know this. I know survival better than lies now." He finally looked directly at her. Not romantic, not triumphant, not fully reluctant either. It was a measured gaze, one forged from calculated silence, but no longer completely emotionless either. The first subtle spark lighting inside the storm he wasn't meant to ignite publicly either. And his answer came softly, low enough that the wind carried it rather than the council of enemies listening unseen behind gates she would never understand fully. "Then you and I have a treaty, not a love story, not yet." Elena's heartbeat didn't stop racing at treaty proclamations now either.
Morning never feels ordinary after your name has been spoken in an extraordinary world, and Elena felt that the moment dawn painted the Moretti estate windows gold but offered no warmth to the cold uncertainty seated inside her chest. Because sunlight can illuminate rooms, it cannot illuminate intentions, and intentions in Adrian Moretti's world were written not in ink but strategy, loyalty, and survival clauses whispered through generations. So when she entered the hallway to meet him for the city council meeting as the family had instructed, Elena felt every step carried two truths at once. She was no criminal, and yet she was walking beside a criminal empire's heir for protection she never asked to need, because the universe writes irony better than humans ever can, and mafia worlds treat irony like prophecy when fate interferes with business, love, or casualties.
Adrian stood ready near the staircase, navy suit tailored perfectly, posture quiet but commanding, silence balanced like a crown he did not have to announce, and when he turned to see her descending in a modest, elegant dress selected by Moretti stylists, soft beige, sleeved, graceful, civilian-coded for a world that studied civilians like chess pieces, they both shared a moment where silence wasn't battlefield, it was shared understanding, the kind that makes two strangers feel involuntarily allied, even though both protested the Allies the night she nearly died by accident alone. And Adrian said softly as she reached him, "You look like diplomacy, not deception." And Alina exhaled sharply, whispering back, "Good, because I'm not trained for deception." And Adrian gave a subtle nod, guiding her toward the car, not by force now, but by habit, because danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes danger sends polite invitations wearing political titles. The car ride was silent mostly because both were rehearsing a public lie without loving the lie enough to speak it aloud privately, until Alina asked quietly, "Victor, will he be there?" Adrian's jaw muscles tightened subtly, micro-shifting his posture, eyes still forward. He will be watching even if he isn't present. The way powerful men talk about enemies they know too intimately to fear, but too cautiously to underestimate either. He owns the narratives around him. We're testing whose narrative he believes today. And Elena frowned, afraid she understood the sentence's weight more than the grammar inside it. And if he doesn't believe ours... Adrian turned to look at her for the briefest moment, eyes dark, not in intimidation, but calculation. Then your engagement becomes real instead of tactical. And Elena swallowed hard because tactical lies are roles, real titles are prisons. At the council building, marble floors polished like political teeth smiling through bureaucratic hunger to consume power rather than welfare, Elena felt the stares before she felt the chandeliers, the whispers before she heard names, because in this world people don't need microphones to announce influence. Influence is acoustic, and whispers carry sharper knives than speeches sometimes. And Adrian guided her into the room with that infuriatingly controlled silence that said, "I am not impressed by politics. Politics is impressed by me." And Rafael Moretti stood waiting near council members, greeting his nephew first, then glancing at Alina like presenting her introduction was presentation of alliance rather than romance. "Stay close but calm," Rafael instructed in low professional tone. "Power hates nervous quick movements." And then council meeting began. Politics is theater, mafia is shadow direction backstage. Elena was not trained for theater. Adrian was raised to own backstages. Victor wasn't physically present, but his presence was architecture, his alliances breathing through guards and council hires who monitored narratives rather than safety regulations too thoroughly. And when Adrian introduced her in formal cadence, "This is Alina Hart, my fiancé." The name Hart had been invented strategically hours ago, like a passport forged for survival rather than travel. Elena felt the thinnest chill inscribe itself between her shoulder blades because invented names have two purposes, protection or burial identification, and council members nodded too carefully, professionally, already reading narratives rather than romance inside introductions, until one council member asked gently, but dangerously, "And is the engagement official with your father's blessing?" Because blessing is bureaucracy here. Officialdom is contract stamping. "It has the family's support," Adrian said smoothly. Not saying yes, not saying no, because the best mafia lies resemble truth without confirming truth enough to be pinned legally. And council members nodded again, satisfied for now that she was under Moretti claim, not Victor's leverage proposal. And Elena exhaled slowly, diplomacy working. After hours of meetings, introductions, tactical theater, Victor finally arrived near corridors as council recessed for lunch diplomacy intervals. Tall, dangerous, suit darker than ambition alone, eyes sharp but unreadable. And when his gaze landed on Elena and Adrian walking beside her, something flickered, recognition or recalibration. Elena didn't know which. Adrian certainly knew the difference. And Victor stepped toward them, stopping only 2 feet away, because powerful men calculate distance like dominance scale too, speaking low but intense. "A fiancé, Adrian." And Alina felt the theater's backstage director speak finally with that quiet personal assessment tone that Victor Moretti's rivals probably feared more than a gun aimed too politely now. Alina forced a faint diplomatic smile, while Adrian inclined his head slightly. Temporary narratives become official eventually in our world, but this narrative wasn't yours to construct, Adrian answered quietly, and Victor's gaze slid from Adrian to Elena, studying her not romantically, but like someone testing if fiction smelled too civilian to survive influence hurricanes alone. Elena Hart, Victor repeated quietly, and Elena forced steadier posture because names said twice in Mafia corridors are never introductions, they are possessive readings or target selections. How did this happen? Victor asked her directly now, not Adrian. And Adrian didn't stop the shift because theater was part of demonstration today. Elena answered softly, I met him at the gala. Which was not lie, which was not truth, which was not fully confession either. Precisely the way mafia diplomacy speaks to politicians too, in half-truths wearing confidence. Fate writes stories faster than contracts, Victor said silently, eyes scanning her posture, not trembling hands, but the pulse beneath them. And then he gave slow, meaningful nod, turning to Adrian again. I'll give you the month to keep this narrative believable, and left. Month, not hour, not day. Stories had now been sanctioned for continuation, not questioned anymore either. Later that afternoon, in thoughtful balcony corridors overlooking city lights, not gold, lights, because gold is asset, but lights are aesthetics powerful men enjoy quietly too, Adrian stood near a window, undone tie like vulnerability hint, but only hint, not confession. Alina joined him slowly holding breath steady, because Adrian no longer looked like direction backstage. Adrian looked like someone who was beginning to believe his own half-truths privately too, until he said quietly, listening to nothing but the wind because wind has no alliances in mafia universes. Tonight was necessary. And Elena exhaled softly. Necessary feels a lot like captivity here. Adrian frowned slightly, because heirs don't like captivity metaphors, they like treaty proposals. You're free to walk the halls now, that's more freedom than yesterday. And Elena turned to face him directly, not angry now, careful, diplomatic, brave in silence too. And tomorrow, Elena asked because tomorrow defines treaties more than sunsets ever can. Adrian replied softly, we continue the story until it no longer needs continuation. But needs change, stories evolve. Victor allowed a month for believability. Nobody expected believability might turn into sincerity instead of theater eventually. And upstairs in Moretti Estate halls glowing with diplomacy whispers rather than declarations, Elena's heart wasn't ready to fall yet. Adrian's heart was no longer ready not to fall either. A month can feel like a blessing when the alternative is death. But a month can also feel like a sentence when every passing day tightens a narrative leash around your life. And Elena felt both truths simultaneously as the days inside the Moretti mansion no longer moved like war drums. They moved like silent clocks, ticking politely, yet unkindly. Because mafia empires don't hunt loudly. They claim territory quietly until territory forgets it was ever free land. And with every hallway Elena crossed now without guards stopping her, without family elders evaluating her posture mid-breath, without council politics slicing her introductions into categories of leverage or liability anymore either, she felt a strange twist of irony. Her captivity had grown elegant enough that it began resembling protection rather than imprisonment, and the most terrifying part was her heart was beginning to adapt to the bars without even noticing when exactly the bars had been built. Adrian wasn't avoiding her anymore. He was avoiding her too little now, which was worse because avoidance is fear. Proximity is inevitability, and inevitability in mafia worlds always escalates into attachment clauses neither party planned to sign voluntarily either. So when Elena found him in the private library one late afternoon, not strategy room this time, library, because even crime heirs like literature when the wars pause. Adrian was flipping through an old Italian poetry book as if poetry posed no threat to a heart trained to own shadows rather than emotions, giving her a small, subtle nod when she approached. Did you know, Elena asked quietly, that every love story you don't want is written in a library? And Adrian's eyebrow lifted slightly because sarcasm is a safer emotion for Mafia heirs than softness alone. Then libraries are more dangerous than council meetings, and something in his tone carried the faintest ghost of a smile, the ghost that whispers, "You're already falling, but you haven't admitted falling yet, not even internally either." She sat beside him now without tense posture, without rehearsed diplomacy, ankles crossing under the table, arms relaxing, because familiarity is rebellion too, quietly. "Your family stopped questioning me," Elena noted after a moment, as if family silence confirmed narrative believability finally. "They didn't stop questioning you, they started trusting you instead," Adrian corrected softly without looking directly, eyes scanning the same poem for the third time, because repeating poems is the Mafia heir's way of processing emotions he doesn't want to label emotion publicly either, and Elena watched him carefully, realizing, that wasn't poetry you were reading, that was distraction. Adrian closed the book gently, exhaling quietly, and for a moment Elena thought maybe distraction was surrendering, but surrender in Mafia language doesn't close doors. Surrender takes someone to balconies instead. So they stood at the mansion balcony again that evening, city lights glowing below, her cream shawl fluttering silently around her arms, because shawls look like diplomacy, but fluttering fabric is always rebellion metaphor too feminine to punish directly. Adrian stood beside her now, arms relaxed instead of crossed, posture unreadable, but no longer unfeeling either, until Elena asked softly the question that had been circling both of them for weeks now, like uninvited satellites orbiting a treaty neither party planned to escalate into romance truly either. "Adrian, what happens when the world no longer wants the lie to stay a lie?" Adrian blinked slowly, finally turning to look directly at her. Silence not battlefield, but answer assembly point now instead. "Then the lie becomes a risk, not a prison, a risk." And Elena frowned because risk can mean love or casualty assessment too. And risks, Adrian continued, require choices. Choices, the thing Elena never thought she'd be allowed here. "And what are you choosing?" Elena whispered, because observing an heir's face in silence tells truths his voice never fully confesses. Adrian studied her for several seconds, storm not outside now, storm inside his gaze instead. And then he answered quietly, "I'm choosing protection first. Everything else comes after." But Elena wasn't asking about priorities. She was asking about his heart axis mid-storm alone. And Adrian understood the unspoken correction inside her question because Mafia heirs speak silence too fluently now either. "And if protection leads to attachment," Adrian inhaled slowly, "then I put attachment behind gates where my enemies can't reach it." And Elena swallowed hard because gates don't only block enemies. Gates can also keep civilians from fleeing too easily once attachments have been caged, elegantly or otherwise. That night, she couldn't sleep again, not because of fear, but because fate had begun speaking too loud personally in the silences, now instead of threats. She walked to the hallway window at 2 a.m., where moonlight scattered like broken silver coins across Moretti Gardens, seeing Adrian below near the fountain, coat thrown loosely over his shoulder, posture quiet, head slightly tilted down as if processing emotions without public allowances either, and her heart twisted again because a man raised to own shadows rather than emotions was protecting her so sincerely that sincerity had begun displacing theater without notice slowly. And when Adrian looked up, catching her silhouette at the window, their eyes met again. Not strategy, not diplomacy, not sarcasm, not questions now either. Just two humans accidentally claimed into a fake engagement narrative, slowly falling for each other without contract negotiation finally. He didn't wave, he didn't speak, he simply gave the smallest nod, the nod that said, "I see you, not the story, you." Elena whispered, "Oh no," because falling in love with Adrian Moretti wasn't part of the plan, and now neither side remembered when the plan had ended and the story had begun anymore either. Elena used to believe that rings were symbols of love, devotion, and destiny. Tiny circles forged from gold or silver, carrying promises spoken softly between two souls who chose each other freely. But the ring now resting on the nightstand in her Moretti-assigned room had never symbolized any of those things when the story began. It had been born from necessity, a clever tactical performance Adrian delivered in front of predators dressed in suits and alliances rather than wolves wearing fur, because in his world, survival announcements are louder than emotional confessions. And when he had slid that ring onto her finger during the gala a month ago, it wasn't a vow, it was a shield disguised as a vow, the kind that protects you while stealing your anonymity simultaneously. And the irony of it all was not that she wore the ring. The irony was that her heart had begun learning the shape of the hand that placed it there, even though both of them had only signed up for pretense, not permanence. Days had passed, then weeks, and then that sanctioned month of lying convincingly in a room full of wolves had done what months do best when hearts are involved. It rewrote them quietly, without permission, without signatures, without council approval, changing fear into familiarity, familiarity into reluctant trust, trust into dependency, dependency into softness, softness into something warm and uncharted even the shadows couldn't translate into strategy memos anymore either. And the moment that transformation clicked too loudly inside her head, Elena realized the most terrifying part of all. She was no longer afraid of the cage. She was only afraid of exiting it alone. Because love stories inside combat zones don't begin with love. They begin with shared survival clauses. And sometimes survival is the seed romance waters until it becomes attachment. Dangerous enough to test Mafia Heir's untrained invulnerability too thoroughly eventually. Meanwhile, Adrian stood downstairs in his father's office, posture firm but no longer unfeeling either. Undone tie once again implied diplomacy fatigue rather than hardness, and when Raphael Moretti entered silently, closing the door as unspoken hierarchies demanded privacy for high-risk truth assessments finally, Adrian exhaled sharply. "The hour is approaching," Raphael said simply. Because hours that approach in mafia worlds aren't watches, they are ultimatums bearing possibilities of rescue or ruin. Elena walks beside you tomorrow at the public charity summit. Victor won't be there physically, but his men will be watching, scanning narratives like surveillance algorithms with appetites sharper than politics ever carried personally too. If you want to end the deception, tomorrow is the stage where you end it convincingly enough that enemies assume truth rather than vulnerability exploited. And Adrian frowned slightly because endings are the only battlefield Mafia Heirs fear when endings involve someone innocent. Elena spent the hours before that summit pacing the gardens, hair pulled back into a ponytail, not because ponytails looked diplomatic, but because ponytails allowed visibility of posture rather than strands fluttering mid-panic. Adrian watched her from the balcony, not stepping toward her immediately either, arms relaxed rather than crossed, reflecting that softened posture she did not want to escalate into confession, until he finally descended the stairs and crossed the estate grounds toward her slowly. Elena turned the moment she sensed footsteps, instincts responding to gait rhythm more than noise eventually either, and Adrian reached her with the same gentle steadiness he had adopted in that library weeks ago. "You're nervous," he whispered quietly. Not judgment, not interrogation, observation. The kind that notes pulse trembling rather than hands trembling too. Elena exhaled carefully, nodding, because words were risking emotional misfire now either. "Tomorrow isn't just a test for Victor," she replied softly. "It's a test for us." And Adrian's gaze stilled. "Yes," he answered quietly, "it is." At the summit, charity halls glittered beneath elegant chandeliers not benevolent enough to mask ambition hunger or influential predators roaming corridors mid-assessing visual narratives rather than welfare budgets too thoroughly. Adrian Moretti introduced her once again with smooth practice cadence. "This is Elena Hart, my fiancé." And though Hart was passport fiction, his voice carried sincerity enough that Elena felt her pulse tighten again, until Victor's men entered subtly, flanking the corridors, scanning micro-performances like strategy algorithms built from instinct rather than intellectual property, too. And in that moment, Elena realized half-truths were no longer diplomacy. They were battlefields, arranged elegantly but unkindly eventually, too. "We end it tonight," Elena whispered beside Adrian, "because theater disintegrates faster when hearts interfere uninvited." Adrian inclined his head slightly, scanning corridors, Raphael Moretti watching from afar now either, and then Adrian said softly the words that Elena never thought Adrian Moretti would ever speak out loud publicly either. The engagement was a lie. Gasps rippled through the hall like tiny seismic romantic aftershocks dressed in betrayal metaphors rather than declarations too direct to punish legally. Livia Moretti stilled mid-shock, staff pausing forks or cue cards dropping too, his father, Matteo's jaw tightening, because fathers tighten jaws rather than hearts too. Raphael remaining composed because uncles analyze endings like contract termination assessment clauses eventually. Elena felt Victor's men shift posture, reaching covertly for weapons, perhaps diplomacy collapsing like entropy, until Adrian continued, voice low, calm, controlled, but no longer unfeeling either. "The love is not." Silence crashed louder than guns ever could because love confessions inside mafia worlds don't roar, they rewrite territory quietly until territory forgets when the treaty became surrender to softness instead of strategy memos. Victor's men froze because confusion is louder than allegiance when narratives derailed too confidently mid-firearm negotiations. Adrian placed a hand around Elena's waist, not forced, not gentle enough to look accidental either. A claim, a truth, a treaty rewritten into permanence finally. Council elders exchanging glances, unsure which narrative axis had just been subverted, until Adrian said simply, "You can't kill fiction. You can't kill consequence. She is consequence now, not leverage." And Victor's men retreated silently. Guns never fired, allegiances never tested further because narratives that derail too sincerely rarely need confirmation mid-bloodshed either, when outcome has already claimed territory emotionally too. Later, on the balcony, again that same night, city lights glowing below, but no longer unkindly, Adrian stood beside her, arms relaxed, Elena leaning silently against the railing, real name not heart, actual brother saved, secrecy not needed anymore either, wrapping the shawl around her arms, fluttering softly, not rebellion, but surrender to warm narrative turn now. And Elena whispered softly, "You said love in front of enemies, Adrian. That was dangerous." Adrian folded his arms loosely, not crossed, protective comfort assembly stance, because Mafia Heirs assess truth casualties faster than auditions. Victor confronted him later that night, privately, not publicly, because public consequences were real enough yesterday, too brief for gatherings now either. "You chose sincerity over strategy," Victor said carefully. "Never expected that." Apostrophe tightening not emotionally, but acknowledgement economically too. Adrian gave faint, measured nod. Strategy ended the moment Elena stepped near me a month ago. And Victor exhaled slowly, then protect her unstrategically too. Raphael listening from afar, silent, diplomacy satisfied, boundaries acknowledged, no prisoners declared casualty, flows summarizing territory shifts without fire. Elena met his family again the next morning, not in politics, but honesty cadence now. Matteo studying her not strategically, but like father judging son's taste indirectly. Livia giving subtle approving nod, because Livia approves civilians only when civilians become siblings eventually too. Raphael smiling faintly because uncles smile when narratives end without funerals needed. At the garden fountain later that afternoon, Adrian Moretti stood before Elena Hart, real name, real heart, real treaty, real consequence, rewritten into love rather than politics memos quietly now either, sliding the ring onto her finger once again, not a shield, not strategy, not council-sanctioned fiction either. A vow. And Elena smiled because smiles are the only signatures love asks civilians to sign, voluntarily too. And Adrian Moretti whispered, "Now you belong to me, not by deal, by truth." Elena replied softly, heart calm at last, "Then it's good you fell hard, because I'm not going anywhere." And she didn't. Not alone. Not ever.